Hi, I'm a Bullis Student Tutor, and today we're going to talk about, as part of the Civil War, the strengths of the North and the strengths of the South. Northern and Southern strengths. At the beginning of the Civil War, both the North and the South believed that they had specific strengths that would help them to win the war. Let's start with the North. The North was far more industrial than the South, and this allowed them to create weapons, to create clothing. It was extremely helpful. The North also had an advantage in that they had 90% of America's railroads at the time, and this was extremely helpful for moving troops, moving supplies, things like that. The North had a larger population than the South, and this population was growing from runaway slaves from the South, as well as from Irish and German immigrants from Europe. The North had a fairly good navy, although it had a very bad or not so good army. And the North had an established central government, and this is my central government building here. But this was beneficial to the North because the South was in the process of creating a central government and proving that they could be effective leaders, whereas the North had already proven this. They had already established their government, and they were in the process of leading already. Women in the North had a history of involvement politically and socially, and this was an advantage for the North. And the North tended to have more European support, and this is going to be Europe over here, than the South. They had more European support than the South. Finally, the North had a more solid banking system than the South, which allowed for the North to experience a lot less inflation during the war than the South did. The North still experienced about 80% inflation, I believe, but the South experienced 9,000% inflation. Now, the South, though, had its share of strengths, the major one being cotton. And this is my cotton plant. The South had an extremely productive economy because of its cotton production. The South had a high morale and passion for their cause. They were fighting to protect this new country that they wanted to found. And they also did not technically have to win the war. They only had to allow the North to become weak enough to give up. This is my broken down N for the North. While the South could technically win when the North gave up, the North had to physically invade the South in order to achieve their goal of keeping the United States as one country. The South had a home field advantage because most of the battles of the Civil War were fought in the South. And the South also had soldiers who were ready for battle. Soldiers in the South had trained with horses, they had trained with guns during their lives, whereas in the North, people were not as familiar with horses and guns, and so they required more training. And finally, the South had far more effective leadership than the North did, especially militarily. And actually only militarily. Their military leadership was aggressive and decisive as opposed to the North. So, you can see that both the North and the South had specific strengths that they believed would help them as they entered the Civil War. This has been a Bullis Student Tutor video. If you liked this and found it helpful, feel free to like the video, leave us a comment, or check us out and our other videos on our YouTube page. Thank you.